The cabin had always been more than just wood, nails, and stone to me. It was a place that carried the weight of generations, a sanctuary where time slowed down and the noise of the outside world couldn't reach. My father built it with his own hands, plank by plank, back when this entire area was nothing more than open countryside and scattered farmland. I grew up watching him sand the beams, hammer the nails, and carve his initials into the oak mantel above the fireplace. My mother tended to the garden outside, her hands always smelling faintly of rosemary and mint, while my siblings and I ran through the surrounding woods until the sun dipped below the horizon. Every memory of my childhood seemed tied to that place, and when I inherited the cabin years later, it felt less like ownership and more like stewardship. I wasn't just taking care of land, I was protecting my family's history. Moving in permanently was supposed to be a peaceful return to simpler living. After years in the city, dealing with the constant grind of deadlines, honking horns, and suffocating crowds, the idea of waking up to birdsong and the smell of pine was a dream. I had spent months preparing for this change, restoring the cabin's roof, sealing the windows, repairing the deck, and stocking up on supplies. I wanted everything to be perfect when I finally settled in, and for the first few days, it was. Each morning, I'd sit on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching the mist roll off the lake as sunlight painted the water gold. At night, I'd sit by the fire and listen to the quiet hum of crickets. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. But peace, I quickly learned, is fragile when others see your happiness as something they can control. The first confrontation came just 3 days after I moved in. I was sipping coffee on the porch, my boots propped on the railing, when 3 figures appeared at the end of the dirt driveway. They weren't neighbors coming by to welcome me. They wore matching polo shirts embroidered with Lakeside HOA Committee, and each clutched a clipboard like it was a badge of authority. Without so much as a greeting, they began walking toward my cabin, their eyes scanning everything like vultures circling prey. The woman in front, a sharp-faced blonde with an expression carved into permanent disapproval, spoke first. "You're in violation of multiple HOA guidelines," she announced flatly. Her voice carried the tone of someone who had already judged and sentenced me before hearing a single word in return. She pointed at the rustic, split-rail fence lining the driveway. "That's not HOA-approved fencing. It'll need to be removed." Before I could respond, one of the men chimed in, gesturing toward the cabin itself. "This structure doesn't comply with the HOA's design standards. The roof line is non-conforming, and the siding hasn't been approved." I blinked, staring at them in disbelief. This was my family's cabin, built decades before their association had even existed. The land had been deeded to my family long before there were paved roads or cul-de-sacs here. Yet here they were, treating me like a trespasser on my own property. I told them as much, trying to keep my voice calm. "This cabin predates your HOA. My family's name is on the deed. Your rules don't apply here." The blonde woman, who I would later come to know as Karen, simply crossed her arms and smirked. "Doesn't matter, you're living within HOA jurisdiction now. If you want to stay here, you'll comply. Otherwise, we'll begin proceedings to claim the property." That word and claim landed like a thunderclap. They weren't just asking for me to trim hedges or repaint shutters. They were suggesting that my home, my land, and my history somehow belonged to them. My jaw tightened as anger coursed through me. "You can't claim what you don't own," I told her. Karen tilted her chin upward with that smug, dismissive smile. "We'll see about that," she said, turning on her heel as if her verdict had already been decided. Over the next several days, their harassment escalated. Notices appeared taped to my door demanding thousands of dollars in back dues I supposedly owed. Every notice came stamped with threatening language. "Final warning, immediate action required. Failure to comply will result in legal action." Neighbors whispered that the HOA had been eyeing my land for years, waiting for a chance to fold it into their growing subdivision. I began to believe them. It didn't stop at paper. Members of the HOA began trespassing on my property, photographing my cabin, my truck, even the tools in my shed. They patrolled like landlords surveying a rental unit, as though my privacy no longer existed. More than once I caught them standing in my garden with measuring tapes, jotting notes as though they were preparing blueprints for their next conquest. When I confronted them, they'd wave it off as routine assessment. Routine for them, perhaps, but for me it was violation. They came knocking at odd hours too, their fists rapping against the wooden door just as I sat down for dinner or was about to head to bed. Each time they demanded meetings, demanded signatures, demanded compliance. Each time I refused. I told them again and again this was private property, not subject to their HOA rules. But my words seemed to bounce off them like stones off steel. The breaking point came a week later. I had driven into town for supplies and returned to find Karen and 3 committee members walking openly across my land. Karen had a tape measure in one hand, a notebook in the other. They were pacing the cabin, scribbling notes and muttering among themselves. I stormed over, my patience finally gone. "What do you think you're doing?" Karen turned slowly, her smirk firmly in place. "We're assessing what renovations will be necessary when this land reverts to the HOA. It's only a matter of time." For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. The audacity was staggering. They weren't just threatening anymore. They were planning, preparing, and operating under the assumption that my cabin already belonged to them. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just harassment. This was a hostile takeover. They wanted my land, my home, and my peace, and they believed they had the power to seize it through intimidation, manipulation, and legal threats. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that I wasn't just another homeowner they could bully into submission. I was holding a truth they would never see coming, one that would unravel every ounce of authority they thought they had. I looked at Karen, standing there with her tape measure and smug grin, and felt something shift inside me. They thought I was vulnerable. They thought they could steamroll me into surrender. But the reality was far different. I wasn't just a man protecting his family's legacy. I was the one person they could never afford to cross. And soon, they were going to learn exactly why. The morning after I caught the HOA prowling around my cabin, the air felt heavier. Clouds hung low over the tree line and the lake rippled like it knew something was brewing. I woke earlier than usual, unable to shake the words Karen had thrown at me. It's only a matter of time. Their arrogance wasn't just talk. They were convinced they had already won. That belief came from years of bullying others into compliance steamrolling families who didn't have the resources or the will to fight back. But I wasn't one of those people. When I sat down with the stack of old deeds, contracts, and land surveys that had been tucked away in my father's lockbox, I realized just how strong my position truly was. The cabin and the land it sat on weren't just free of HOA oversight, they were outside the jurisdiction altogether. My family had secured exemptions decades ago, long before the subdivision was ever developed. What's more, those exemptions were tied not only to the property, but also to the title itself. No HOA, no matter how loud or aggressive, could touch it. But the real kicker, the one detail that turned this entire situation from harassment into poetic justice, was a section buried deep in the records. When the Development Corporation, behind the HOA, purchased the surrounding parcels, they signed agreements recognizing my family as the landlord of record for several common easements that ran through the area. That meant their neatly paved roads, their utilities, and even parts of their community property were technically tied to my deed. For years they had overlooked it, probably too focused on building shiny new homes to bother with dusty old contracts. But it was there, and it meant that I wasn't just a homeowner resisting their rules, I was their landlord. I remember sitting back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. All their threats, all their arrogance, all their bluster, it was about to backfire in a way they could never have imagined. Later that afternoon, they came again. This time, it wasn't just Karen and a couple of clipboard carriers. It was nearly the entire board, 7 people marching up my driveway as though they were storming a castle. Their eyes blazed with determination, and Karen strutted at the front like a general leading troops into battle. "You've ignored our notices," she snapped the moment she reached the porch. "This is your final warning. Either pay your dues, submit your property for inspection, and comply with HOA standards, or we'll file for enforcement through our legal team." Behind her, the others nodded like trained soldiers, each clutching binders stuffed with papers. They thought they were about to overwhelm me with legal jargon and intimidation. But this time I wasn't standing there empty-handed. I had the deed in one hand, a file of contracts in the other, and the calm certainty of someone who knew the ground he stood on was unshakable. "Funny you should bring up legal documents," I said evenly, laying the stack of papers on the porch railing. "Because I have a few of my own, and unlike your printouts, these aren't just threats, they're binding." Karen narrowed her eyes. "What are you talking about?" I flipped open the deed, letting the bold lettering catch the light. "This cabin and this land have been in my family since before your subdivision even existed. According to county records, this property is exempt from HOA jurisdiction. That means your rules don't apply here. Not now, not ever." She waved. Dismissively, though I could see a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. "That doesn't matter. You're living in our community. Everyone here abides by the same rules." I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through her arrogance. "You might want to double-check your own agreements, because while you were busy threatening me, I went through the contracts your development company signed decades ago. Turns out my family retained ownership rights to several easements that run right through your neighborhood. Roads, utilities, access paths, all tied directly to this deed." I tapped the document for emphasis. "Which makes me your landlord." The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd heard before. For a moment, the group just stood there, stunned into stillness. Even the wind seemed to pause, as though the forest itself was waiting for their reaction. Karen's smirk faltered, replaced by a twitch at the corner of her mouth. One of the board members, a nervous man with thinning hair, shuffled his feet and whispered, "Is that true?" I held up the signed contracts, the county clerk's stamps, clearly visible. "It's true, and it's recorded in the courthouse if you need proof. So while you've been wasting your time trying to bully me into submission, you've actually been trespassing on land that I control. Legally speaking, every one of you has been violating my property rights." Karen's face turned crimson, a mix of rage and disbelief. "This is absurd," she sputtered. "We're the HOA. We run this community. You can't just—" I interrupted firmly, "and I will. Starting now, you will cease all harassment. No more notices on my door, no more trespassing on my property, no more threats. In fact—" I let the pause hang for effect, watching their eyes widen. "As your landlord, I could file claims for back rent on those easements. We're talking years of unpaid use. Do you really want to test me on that?" The nervous board member paled. Another, a woman with dark hair pulled into a bun, muttered, "He's right. If this holds up, we're in violation." Karen spun on her, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare side with him." But the damage was already done. Doubt had spread through her ranks. The same people who had marched up my driveway so confidently now looked like schoolchildren caught misbehaving. I didn't press further. I didn't need to. The truth had landed, and it would ripple through their entire organization like an earthquake. They weren't dealing with a stubborn homeowner anymore. They were dealing with the very person who controlled their access to the land they thought they owned. As they retreated, muttering and arguing among themselves, Karen threw one last glare over her shoulder. "This isn't over," she hissed. I simply smiled, folding the documents back into my folder. "You're right," I said calmly. "It's not over, but this time, it's on my terms." That night, as I sat on the porch with the fireflies, blinking over the lake, I felt something I hadn't since this whole ordeal began. Peace, real, unshakable peace. The HOA had come at me with everything they had, and they had walked away empty-handed. They had underestimated me, underestimated my history, and underestimated the truth. But most of all, they had underestimated just how much fight I was willing to put up for the legacy my family built. And now, every time they drove their shiny SUVs over the very easements tied to my deed, they would remember it. They thought they were the ones holding the power. But in the end, it turned out they had been living under mine all along. And as I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face, I whispered the same words I'd one day share with every viewer of my story. Don't ever let Them fool you into thinking you're powerless. Stand your ground, and the truth will always set you free. Because this wasn't just a victory, it was a warning. For every HOA Karen out there was someone like me, ready to remind them that bullying has consequences,